Over the past few episodes, we have been here in the city of Hiroshima talking about the effects of the atomic bomb that dropped here on August 6th of 1945. There are thousands upon thousands of stories from the people who experienced the blast that day, so many that it would be impossible to tell them all. But there was the story of one man by the name of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi was not from Hiroshima. He was from out of town. He was a ship designer, but happened to be in Hiroshima on the day of the blast. He was about 1.5 miles away from here and was on the edge of a potato field. And he said that in the moments before the blast, he noticed a woman in black that was walking by. And then at 8:15 a.m., there was a flash. And he instinctively threw himself in the ditch. Shockwave came, lifted him up in the air. And when he got back on his feet, he noticed that the woman in black was completely gone. And he also noticed that his arm had been burned and was like this brownish black color. He said it was kind of like the color of an overcooked chicken. And as he was regaining his senses, Yamaguchi had the same thought that I'm sure many others had, that he had to get back to his family. So whether by train or by car or whatever, Yamaguchi was determined to get back to his wife and child in Nagasaki. On the evening of August the 7th, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was going to catch the second to last train out of Hiroshima to Nagasaki. And by this point, he was not doing well. In addition to the burns on his arm and on his face, well, he was experiencing a ridiculously high fever and he was having dry heaves. He couldn't even keep down a glass of water. So this is a man who was really sick, but he manages to make it back down to where I am currently in the city of Nagasaki. He reunites with his wife and with his child. And on the morning of August the 9th, he wakes up and he is ready to go and report to his job at the Mitsubishi Industrial Combine. His wife tells him he doesn't have to go, but he's duty bound. So he goes, and as he is reporting to his superiors what happened in Hiroshima, he's telling them about the lady in black who completely disappeared. He's telling them about the flying glass and saying, hey, if you see a flash, you need to get down, get away from glass, don't wear dark clothing. And one of the section chiefs speaks up and he says, this is a complete hoax. He said, there's no way that a single bomb could take out a city like that. And he says, you're an engineer, calculate it. And Yamaguchi says, I already have. And he points to his arm and to his face. And the section chief says, exactly. He said, your brain has been injured and you aren't talking sense right now. And about that time outside, well, all of them in the room hear the air raid sirens. So right here, prominently marked in Nagasaki with this memorial, is the Hypo Center. It was right here above us at 11:02 on August 9th, 1945, that a B-29 called Boxcar was going to drop the world's second atomic bomb. It's nicknamed Fat Man. This was a plutonium-based bomb that was even larger than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Now, everything that went right with the Hiroshima mission went completely wrong with the Nagasaki mission. This thing was an absolute mess. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even supposed to be the Nagasaki mission. The primary target was Kokura. The backup target was Nagasaki. And we'll get to how Nagasaki ended up becoming the city that the bomb gets dropped on. But again, it was an absolute mess. Now, there are 3 planes that are going to be flying on this mission. You have Boxcar, which was piloted by Charles Sweeney. Charles Sweeney had piloted the Great Artiste on the Hiroshima mission, so he is going to see 2 atomic bombs dropped. With Boxcar is going to be the Great Artiste. It's going to be like the scientific observation plane. It is piloted by Fred Bok. So Bok and Sweeney had actually switched planes. Fred Bok usually flew Boxcar. And then the photographic plane was named Big Stink. And again, these guys are going to have nothing but problems from the get-go. First off, prior to taking off, well, they found out that the fuel reserve tank wasn't pumping. So there were 600 gallons of fuel that were trapped in the plane. So this is not good on a long-range mission to be carrying this extra weight. Plus, you've got a 5-ton bomb that is adding even more weight to your plane. The weather plane had already flown to the primary target of Kokura. They reported back that it was clear, but there was a band of rain that would be moving in that could possibly obscure the target. And then after that, you're looking at cloud cover for maybe a week. And then after that, it's cyclone season. All right, so they did some quick math and figured that they had enough to fly from Tinian to the target and back if there were no problems. Once in the air, the problems just continue for Boxcar. At the rally point, they lose Big Stink. So one of the 3 planes, the photographic plane that is supposed to go with them, is nowhere to be found. Turns out it was like a couple miles above them. At 6 a.m., there was a master alarm went off that indicated that the firing mechanism was about ready to trigger the bomb. So Charles Sweeney had a tough choice to make. He can either jettison this $2 billion bomb into the Pacific Ocean, or they can be part of an early sunrise in the Far East. Neither is a good option. Turns out that it was just a false alarm. And then once they get to Kokura, the target is completely obscured. The night before, the city of Yamata had been firebombed, and the wind had shifted, and smoke now completely obscured the target over Kokura. These guys make 3 passes trying to find a spot where they can drop this bomb, burning precious fuel in the meantime. And finally, they decide to abandon their primary target and go to the secondary target of Nagasaki. Now, in the midst of all of this, the plane Big Stink did manage to reunite with the other 2 B-29s, thanks in part to a mistake that was made on Charles Sweeney's part, where he accidentally bumped a switch and sent a message out over an open channel. So as they are approaching Nagasaki, again, more problems. It turns out that Nagasaki is not like it is today. It wasn't clear blue skies. They ended up having about 80% cloud cover that had rolled in. These guys are running out of fuel, so they can only do a single bomb run. So they decide to switch to some new imaging radar to drop the bomb. Now, they were supposed to drop only on sight. And as they are approaching Nagasaki, well, the bombardier catches an opening in the clouds about 2 miles upriver from the assigned aiming point. And through that, they see the oval-shaped Urakami Stadium. Okay, Urakami Stadium was kind of a like a marking point, like the T-shaped bridge in Hiroshima. So they go ahead and they drop the bomb off target. And when the bomb is released, the bombardier Behan announced bombs away, and then corrected himself and said bomb away. Now, they would manage to make it back to Okinawa just on fumes. And as they were approaching the runway, like, they fired off every single flare that they had. You know, sometimes you'd have flares saying that the plane is damaged or that you had wounded. They fired all of them to indicate that like they were on empty. And when they landed, a medic arrived and stuck his head up into the plane, and he says, "Where are the dead and wounded?" And Sweeney gestured with his thumb back towards Nagasaki, and he said, "Back there." What we are looking at here is a monument at the Hypo Center, and you can see that it says here, it marks the date, 1945, August the 9th at 11:02 a.m. And then above it we see a mother embracing a stricken child. Now, the sculptor designed this to have this stricken child represent Japan, and the mother is representing all of the countries that kind of rallied together to help rebuild Japan into what it is today in the wake of the Second World War. But it's a very striking memorial and kind of invokes some of the sadness for the people on the ground here on that day in August of 45. The photo that we are looking at right now is of the ruins of the Urakami Cathedral. So here in Nagasaki, there's a higher concentration of Christians than what you would see in any other part of Japan. And this was the largest church in East Asia. And as you can see, at 11:02, it was pretty much completely obliterated. There's just a few portions of the wall that remained. Well, in 1958, there was a new church that was constructed on the site. And if you'll look right here, you'll see where this arrow is pointing down. Well, a portion of that church was brought here to the Hypo Center and reconstructed. So you can see part of the archway there and the brickwork, and then of course the statues on top. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's a statue of Francis Xavier, who was the first man to bring Christianity to the Japanese islands. Yeah, here's a piece of one of the original structures here in Nagasaki. Something that is kind of interesting here at the Hypo Center is that when you were standing up here and looking at the memorial, you're not actually at ground level at the time of the bombing. Ground level at the time of the bombing was actually down here. So as you can imagine, in the wake of the dropping of Fat Man, there's a lot of debris and there's a lot of rubble. And ground level was actually down here. So there's a creek that flows through this area, and one of the survivors of the atomic bomb blast later said that they came here and witnessed this scene. It says, I crossed the half-destroyed Matsuyama Bridge over Shimonokawa. There were so many human corpses under it that they formed a dam in the stream. It was like a vision of the apocalypse, a living hell on earth. Not a speck of cloud tainted the sky above, but the earth below was a panorama of carnage and destruction. So, if you would have been here in the days after August 9th of 1945, it's hard for the human mind to comprehend what all of this would have looked like. And here they've done something rather interesting. Even though what we see up at the memorial is not the original ground level, well, here they've preserved some of that ground level, and it's in this glass case. And what we see in there is all of the rubble and detritus from the dropping of the atomic bomb. So there's bits of pottery, there's destroyed buildings, pieces of metal, all kinds of stuff from the destruction here underneath the second atomic bomb. We've moved up to a point just north of the hypocenter, and I wanted to come up here on this high point to talk about something important with the Nagasaki bombing, and that is terrain and how it impacted what happened here. Now, if you'll notice, again, we're on a high point here, but this drops way, way down. Basically, this area of Nagasaki is down in a bowl, and you've got these high mountains surrounding the entire thing. Now, in terms of the destructive capabilities of Fat Man, well, this is actually a bad thing because it's going to limit the blast, and it's going to really intensify it right here in this bowl. Again, this is a bomb that is bigger than Little Boy and should have done more damage. Now, in terms of the preservation of human life, it's actually better that the bomb was dropped here instead of somewhere else that didn't have this kind of a geographic containment zone, for lack of a better term. But that is going to be a major factor here in the bombing of Nagasaki. And there, off in the distance, there's the Irakami Cathedral. We've already talked about that a little bit. We're going to be going and visiting that site here in just a little while. But got a few other things that we're going to look at first. Now, even though the Nagasaki bomb didn't hit its exact aiming point, it was still going to do a lot of damage. You have a bigger bomb, and you also have it being dropped here in this bowl, so the blast is kind of concentrated. And the result is going to be that there are going to be 75,000 killed and about 75,000 wounded in this blast. Yamaguchi is going to survive, though. As a matter of fact, the men that he was with who were doubting his story, their lives were probably saved by the last-minute advice that Yamaguchi had given them. And when he gets out of the building, he emerges into this absolute hell, just like Hiroshima. His building had been kind of shock cocooned, so the blast had went around him and destroyed everything around him. And one of the things that was really striking that he saw was a man who was serving as a lookout, and it looked like his face had just been charred and looked like black alligator skin. And apparently he had been watching Boxcar through binoculars, and the binoculars concentrated that flash of light into his eyes and into his brain and just completely devastated this poor man. Now, as you might expect, here in Nagasaki, they have an atomic bomb museum. This is a museum that I haven't been to yet. We're going to go and check it out and see what else we can learn about what happened here on August 9th. All right, we just entered into the museum here, and one of the first things that greets us as we walk in is this wall clock. This was found in a house near the Sano Shinto Shrine, which was about 800 meters from the Hypo Center, and you can see obviously that this wall clock has been just completely obliterated from the blast, and the hands of the clock have stopped at exactly 11:02, the moment of the explosion. As you continue on, they talk a little bit about Nagasaki before the bombing, and they have all of these photos showing what this city looked like prior to the dropping of the bomb on August 9th of 1945. So they talk about how this was a port for the arrival of Portuguese ships in the 1500s, and that it served as a port city throughout its history. But of course, we now know it more for what happened during the Second World War. Okay, so here's the Urakami Cathedral. There's a high concentration of Christianity that is down here in this part of the country. So there was a very heavy Catholic presence in Nagasaki, and still is today. As far as the religious makeup of Japan, it's mostly Shinto and Buddhist, but there is a minority Christian population here, and most of it is down here in this part of the country. And then finishing up what Nagasaki looks like before the blast, well, this is an aerial photo that was taken by U.S. reconnaissance plane on August the 7th. And the Hypo Center is going to be right here. When you go to Hiroshima, the structure that kind of stands as the iconic centerpiece of the bombing there is the Industrial Promotion Hall, which we now know as the Atomic Dome or the Peace Memorial. Here in Nagasaki, the equivalent to that, at least as it seems to me, is the Urakami Cathedral. So the Urakami Cathedral was one of the largest churches in East Asia. It was a Catholic church, was built in 1914, I believe. And this was in the period when Christianity had basically, the ban on Christianity had been lifted in Japan. And this was kind of the pride of the Christians here in Nagasaki. There were some twin spires that were completed in 1925. Well, the atomic bomb is going to just completely blow it all to pieces. So here in this room, they have a lot of artifacts and a lot of focus that is put on the Urakami Cathedral. So what we're looking at here is a clock that was recovered from the cathedral. Right here is the face of one of the angel statues. This was exposed to the atomic bomb and then was recovered from the rubble. We have pieces of stained glass that were recovered. Again, this is about 500 meters northeast of the Hypo Center. And then again, they just have all kinds of little pieces. This is a stained glass window frame. Here is a rosary. Here is a melted rosary. Okay, so just all kinds of artifacts from this building. We're going to go see a little bit later what's left of this building after we leave the museum, because like I said, they really kind of prop this up as the icon of what Nagasaki experienced during the war. Before we leave this room and move on, there are a few other things to show here. What we were looking at here is a wall remnant from the Fushi Primary School. It was about 1.2 kilometers from the Hypo Center. And then right here, it's fairly dark in this room, but this is a water tank from the Kaiho Middle School. This was about 800 meters from the Hypo Center, so it would have been fairly close, and you can see how the legs of it have been completely melted and contorted. And then over here, again, they have other pieces that were recovered from the city, like this contorted fire tower. If we go over here, this is part of a spiral staircase, if I can get it in focus here, part of a spiral staircase from the Mitsubishi Nagasaki Steelworks office building. Again, that's about 1.1 kilometers from the Hypo Center. Gate post from the Yamazato Primary School. So a lot of schools here in this area. Okay, and then you can go along and just see like all of this recovered rubble and pieces of bent steel and things like that was recovered from this area. And then this is a reproduction of the church that we were talking about just a moment ago. So here in this section, you can see they have a scale model of Nagasaki. And right there in the middle of the screen where you can see kind of that fire burning right now, right in the middle there's the Hypo Center. And you can see, again with this model, as we've already mentioned, how Nagasaki is kind of down in a bowl. So what we have here is a model. So what we have here is a replica of Fat Man, the plutonium-based bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki by the B-29 boxcar. And if we go over here, well, they show a little bit of a model of the internal parts of Fat Man. So right here on the outer edge, this was the fast explosives. The purple part says slow explosives. And then the middle in the blue is called the tamper. Okay, so this is going to be like the spherical core. And then in the middle is going to be the plutonium. Okay, so this was going to be a bigger bomb than what was going to be, than the one that was dropped on Hiroshima. When the atomic bomb drops over Nagasaki, surface temperatures around the hypocenter are going to reach between 5,700 and 7,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Just an insane amount of heat and light energy that is emitted by this bomb. And what we're looking at here are shadows that were left behind by the heat rays. Now, we talked a little bit about this when we were in Hiroshima, that it's not shadows that are burned into these walls and pieces of wood and stuff like that, but rather the flash of light and heat around the shadow bleached the area around it. So what we were looking at right here is the shadow of clothes on a scorched wall. So right here, they actually have a photo of it. So here you can see this wooden wall, and somebody had their clothes hanging out on a line or on a rod, and then when the bomb flashes, everything around that shadow got bleached out and, for lack of a better term, burned the shadow into the object. And they have some photos of other instances of this happening in Nagasaki. So here's one that shows the silhouette of a lookout and his ladder remaining on a wall. Here's one of a gas tank, and then the clothes rod and the clothes on a wooden wall. And then right here is another piece of wood that shows some of the flashing or the scorching of this wood around different objects. One thing that I'm seeing a lot of in this museum are just objects from around the city that were damaged by the blast. So here we have a maple tree that was scorched in the blast, and some bamboo that bears some heavy scars from the heat rays. And then if we just move on down here we're looking at what's called a tortoiseshell cigarette holder. This was owned by a Mr. Usuki, who was a station manager at the Nagasaki Railroad Station. Says that he was exposed to the atomic bombing about 250 meters from the hypocenter, and his charred corpse was later found in the rubble. And this was something that he had that survived the bombing. But they just have all kinds of crazy items here. Okay, here are some bottles that are melted together. Here is the container or the remnants of a girl's lunchbox. This was from Satoko Susumi. She was 14 years old at the time of the bombing, and you can see her rice that has been charred there in that box. And then there's a picture of the family there in the background. But there are just all kinds of items here that were recovered from the blast zone. Here in this section of the museum, they start to shift focus to the human injuries that were caused by the bomb. And one of the first items that they have is this Japanese helmet. And as you can see, there's some texture or debris there on the inside. What we're looking at is part of the victim's skull that remained on the inner surface of the helmet. This was found near the hypocenter. And then we're just going to kind of move through here and show all of the different items. What we have here, obviously, is the shirt of an individual. This is a shirt that belonged to a worker at the Mitsubishi Nagasaki Arms Factory. That was about 1.3 kilometers from the hypocenter. You can see where it has been just completely shredded. And then moving on, we see other articles of clothing. So this is a coat that was lying in a chest of drawers with a pair of glasses
with black frames in the pocket. And it says here, only the pocket that held the glasses show a fading of color, probably a result of the heat reaction. And then, of course, this is quite sad. Here we look at some children's clothing. It's the outer clothing that a woman by the name of Ryu Suiso was wearing. Wow. And then right here, they have a couple different articles of clothing. The one on the left is the work clothing and cap of a worker from the Mitsubishi Nagasaki Steel Works, which was about 1.2 kilometers from the Hypo Center. And you can see where the parts on the left-hand side that were exposed to the heat rays are just completely shredded. And then over here, this is a drill uniform for a guy by the name of Yutaka Sugino. He was exposed to the atomic bomb while conducting military drills at the former Nagasaki Normal School at Lenogo, I think. So he was about 1.6 kilometers from the Hypo Center. Now he survived, but his 6 family members died instantly in their home, which was closer to ground zero. But on the inside of that jacket, he later wrote the words, "Never forget 11 o'clock, August 9th, 1945. Of the items that were recovered from the blast zone, this one might be one of the most sobering that I've seen yet. What we are looking at is a basically blob of melted glass. But if you look closely, there's actually the bones of a human hand that are intermixed in there. So presumably the individual was holding onto a glass bottle. The bomb goes off, the person was killed instantly, and the glass bottle like melted around their hand. That, again, is pretty sobering. Here are a few more interesting artifacts that they have here in the collection, including this wall clock that was located 2.8 kilometers south of the Hypo Center, and you can see that it stopped at exactly 11:02. But another interesting thing that they have here is this set of steps. Now, I've talked a little bit before about the danger of glass in these atomic blasts and how it basically turns an area in, it basically creates like a shotgun blast with glass. Well, this part of the staircase, excuse me, that we are looking at here is from the Zenza Primary School, which was about 1.5 kilometers southeast of the Hypo Center. And if you look closely, well, you can see bits of glass embedded into these steps. So if you can do this to a set of wooden and concrete steps, you can imagine what it would do to a human body. Now, with a bomb that is resulting in 75,000 people killed and 75,000 wounded, you can imagine what this city looked like afterward and the strain that it put on the medical facilities and medical staff and some of the relief efforts. And this display right here kind of touches on that a little bit. So right here we're looking at a cauldron that was used for emergency cooking. There was an individual who had a brewery here locally named Hirose. He was about 6.5 kilometers from the Hypo Center, and then the local Defense Corps enlisted him to come in and help to cook emergency food to distribute to injured people here in the area. And then here are some medical instruments and medical supplies that they have here. So this is it says that it's a pus tray. So a lot of people who had their skin basically ripped off from this degloving of the bombing were walking around just like oozing clear fluids because they had no skin. Okay, so here we're looking at a gauze can and a medicine bottle. Here's a table that was used for operation and a stretcher. But yeah, all of this is kind of pointing to what the doctors and nurses and relief workers were going through after the bombing. We've made our way to the end of the museum, and we just passed through a section that's talking about like the danger of nuclear weapons. And as you might understand, the people of Nagasaki justifiably have some strong opinions about that. But one of the last things that you'll see as you are departing the museum, that many people will just walk right on by, is this image right here. And to me, this is one of the most heartbreaking images of the Second World War. This photo of this young Japanese boy with his deceased brother on his back being taken to a place of cremation. This photo was taken by an American photographer named Joe O'Donnell. And here's what he has to say about this photo. He says, "I noticed a boy about 10 years old walking by. He was carrying a baby slung on his back. In those days, in Japan, it was common to see children playing in vacant lots with their little brothers or sisters on their backs. But this boy was clearly different. I could see that he had come to this burning ground for a serious purpose. He was barefoot. When he reached the edge of the crematory, he stopped and peered inside with a fixed expression. The infant's head was tipped back as if the baby were fast asleep. The boy stood there next to the area for about 10 minutes. The men in white masks walked over to him and gently began undoing the cords that were holding the baby. Then I first realized that the baby was already dead. The men held the boy by the hands and feet and placed it gently on the hot coals. The infant boy made a hissing sound as it was placed in the fire. Then it lit up in a brilliant flame like the deep red of a setting sun. The boy stood there erect and motionless with his innocent cheeks shining scarlet. I noticed that the lips of the boy were also streaked with red as he watched the flames. He was biting his lower lip so hard that it was shone with blood. The flames burned low like the sun going down, and the boy turned around and walked silently away from the burning pit." All right, we have left the museum and have now moved up to the Nagasaki Peace Park. And I don't claim to do a lot of things well, but one of the things that I excel at is showing up to places when they are doing construction and renovation. And this is no exception. Looks like they're doing some work on the monument here. So we're gonna have to work around that a little bit. But I got a few things that I wanna show here before we go today. As we've mentioned several times already, this area of Nagasaki kind of sits down in a bowl, so you can see this high ground right here above us. And the area where the Peace Park is located is kind of a high point within the bowl. And on this high point in 1945 was the Urakami Branch Prison. Right? So it would have straddled
3 neighborhoods here. And this facility was the closest building to the Hypocenter, or the closest public facility. So when the bomb went off on April 9th, it killed everybody here. So there were about 18 staff and 35 facility residents, and then there were also 81 inmates, which included 32 Chinese and maybe around 13 or more Korean inmates. But as you can see right here, well, it just completely stripped this prison down to the foundation. And you can understand why everyone inside was killed. Plus, being up here on a high point, again, the Nagasaki bomb is an airburst. It doesn't hit the ground and then explode. So being up here a little bit higher, it was actually closer to the blast than what we would have been when we were down at the Hypocenter. But yeah, here are some of the remains of the blast here in Nagasaki. What we are looking at here is the remains of the prison wall. So on the day of the bombing, most of the wall and everything got completely obliterated. This is one of the surviving portions. Of course, there's going to be wooden structures inside the building. They are vaporized in just a moment. And of the structures that were there, we just saw some of the foundations. There was a chimney that survived, but pretty much everybody up here got atomized in just a moment. We've now moved over to the Urakami Cathedral. So this is the reconstructed cathedral that was completed in 1959. And as I mentioned before, it seems to me that just my observation that the Urakami Cathedral is to Nagasaki what the atomic dome is to Hiroshima. Everything that I've seen kind of points back to the Urakami Cathedral. So this was a very important structure to the people of Nagasaki, especially the Christian people of Nagasaki. And what we are looking at here are some of the ruins of the original cathedral. Now, when the atomic bomb hits in August of 1945, well, it's reported that between 8,500 and 12,000 Christians perished in the bombing. So what we're looking at here, again, are some of the statues that were outside the original church and part of the original wall. As we saw earlier, part of the church was relocated to the memorial at the Hypocenter. Now, the Christians who did survive the blast ended up residing in a temporary wooden cathedral for a short period of time that was on this site in 1946, and then worshipped in this area until the new cathedral was completed. But yeah, if you come to Nagasaki, here's one of the original buildings, or rather part of it, that survived the blast. So here, just below the church, what we are looking at is the belfry of the Urakami Cathedral. So construction had begun on this church in 1895 after a lot of repression from Japan had lifted, and the church had been completed in 1914, allowing people to freely worship. And then, as we've already mentioned several times now, the church is lost in the atomic bomb blast. But yeah, this is the remains of the belfry of the Urakami Church. So here on the church grounds, they have a museum that is dedicated to the atomic bomb and what happened here at the church. We're going to dodge in there for a second. But first, before we do, here are actually a few more pieces from the original church. These are statues of smiling angels that adorned the church. But of course,
got blasted away by the atomic bomb and were recovered from the rubble. Here on the church grounds, they have a small museum here that holds a collection of artifacts from the Urakami Church that was blown away by the atomic bomb in 1945. Okay, so here starting out, as you walk in, we see a few pictures and then a model of the church. And then when we go over here, in these glass cases, they have different artifacts that were recovered from the rubble. So here we're looking at some bricks, and we see some bottles that were melted under the intense heat of the atomic bomb. And then this one is exceptionally interesting to me. It's a mass of stained glass that melted together in the heat of the blast. And then also here, some round eaves with a floral cross. And then if we move back into this room, well, here is the remnants of the church bell. So you can just imagine the force that it would take to damage a bell like this. This was known as the bell of Angelus, that was destroyed by the atomic bomb, was in the tower of the church. And then here are the stone faces of angels that were adorning the church. Also pieces of the crucifix that was in the church. Again, here we see some more saints and angels. And then right here is the sanctuary lamp that was in the church. So honestly, this is so sad for the Christians who were here in Nagasaki. These are people who for centuries had undergone just intense amounts of persecution, had to worship in secret churches, and had really just in the previous 50 to 75 years had got to a point where they could worship freely and had found peace. And all of that peace was brought to a halt by the war that their country had brought them into and by the bomb that dropped here on August 9th. We've moved just a couple hundred yards north of the Hypo Center, which is back off in this direction. And we are currently at the foot of the hill that forms the Nagasaki Peace Park. And something that is exceptionally interesting right here in this area is that you have all of these air raid shelters that have been dug into the side of the hill. Now they are all blocked off, so we can't go in and take a look. But these were dug into the sides of the hills by the citizens of Nagasaki to be used in the event of an air raid. And anybody who found themselves inside of one of these air raid shelters barely saved their own life on August 9th. So this one right here, you can see goes back and kind of just hooks around, makes a little bit of a U shape. I actually see something back there. I don't know what that is. It's like some sort of bowl or something. Anyway, and then it pops out right over in here. Yeah, pretty interesting. I just happened to stumble on this as I was walking through here. Here's some of the air raid shelters of Nagasaki. So here in the Nagasaki Peace Park, one of the things that you will find in abundance are monuments, especially monuments that were gifted from other nations. And one thing that I'm finding interesting as I am walking through here is that there are a lot of monuments that were donated to Nagasaki
from the former Soviet countries in Europe. So this one here is a gift from the Soviet Union showing a mother and child. This one here is a sculpture that was a gift from Czechoslovakia in 1980. And then right here is yet another one from a former Soviet country that doesn't exist anymore. This one was a gift from East Germany. And then, yeah, I've seen a few others like from Bulgaria, and yeah, lots of former communist countries that donated monuments here to this park. We're gonna wrap up our walk through Nagasaki right here at the Peace Statue. So again, we have some construction going on here. So if I can find some pictures that don't have scaffolding and plywood, maybe I can show what it looks like on a normal day. But this statue was erected by the citizens of Nagasaki on August of 1955 on the 10th anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb. And there's some symbolism here. Okay, so the elevated right hand is pointing up to the sky, warning of the threat of nuclear weapons. The outstretched left hand is symbolizing tranquility and world peace. You can see that it's a very strong looking figure. Okay, so it's embodying divine omnipotence and love, but there's also a gentleness to the statue. And then the folded right leg symbolizes quiet meditation, while the left leg is poised for action and ready to hop up and assist humanity. Yeah, this is the Peace Statue of Nagasaki. Now, I could be wrong on this, but just in my experience over the past few days, it seems to me that Nagasaki doesn't quite get the number of visitors that Hiroshima does. But there's a lot here to see, and there are a lot of lessons here to be learned. We live in a world where you see a lot of world leaders and people who are maybe a little bit too flippant with how they talk about the use of nuclear weapons. But it's places like Nagasaki that really show what the true human cost of nuclear warfare looks like.